Hello there, and welcome to the second season research-ish type guide. Basically, this video we're going to take you through how I would play the second season following that previous video, which focused on how you would do in your first season, which you can see on the screen right now. But in this one, we're going to focus on how we get through that second year, which is heavily focused on research. And I'm going to take you through this entire year, starting from how I would do my designs for the first race to how I would do the research when it opens up in April. Now, financially, we aren't too hot. We're 8 million running a deficit here, so we'll deal with that first. We're just gonna kind of ignore anything here because honestly, it's not important. And we'll get right to the sponsor negotiation, which is going to allow us to start those first designs. And generally here, you are probably going to be forced to some degree to pick a sponsor that at least has some upfront funding for you. You want to have at least 10 million. So we're going to stick with Rockstar here, and we're going to see if we can find any of these sponsors that give me upfront funding, like Bang. It's going to cut the driver marketability a little bit, but that's fine. Honeywell, we'll take that one as well. And honestly, after that, it's just trying to maximize race income, honestly. And to be fair, there isn't really too many good sources of money here. So I think we'll take this one and also actually do the Cisco one here, just for that little bit of extra infusion early. Engagement money is not really something that I prefer, as you might have guessed, because it can be very, very bad for you at times. But this is a decent enough starting point. So try and get a sponsor deal. That is going to make your life a little bit easier. Now, first off, in terms of designs, we want to try and make a car that is fairly new going into, say, Bahrain. And if we can, an absolutely new car by the time we reach Australia. To do this, we are going to start with investing this first safety period into the underfloor. We didn't really invest too much into the underfloor at the end of last season. So we're kind of doing this to get a little bit of that performance that we lost back. And here we are just going to focus on the cornering across the board, similarly to last season. We're going to be doing a lot of things that are very similar to how we did things last year, and that's just how things are going to go. Now, we aren't going to get everything that we want prepped before the first race of the year, and that's just how things are going to be here because of the fact that we don't have all the engineers, and also because of the fact that we don't have a huge amount of money. So we're just going to get started here, making a chassis that is focused on drag reduction, airflow middle, get that sorted. Next up, we're going to do a sidepod that is focused on cooling and cornering. Again, we're making these pieces basically identical to last year. We could sacrifice a little bit of cooling here because as you can see, it's already pretty high. But I still like to get a decent chunk of cooling in before we go into the first race of this season. So suspension as well, top speed, get that extra bit of tire preservation, which is going to help us with managing our races a lot better. And getting over 70% tire preservation in the second season is actually going to be very, very helpful. So we do that as well. Now, honestly, there isn't really much to do while we wait for these designs to finish. So let's just speed along until we get there. We have a fairly good starting car here. We do need to do a little bit of high-speed work. But already this car is very, very good for cornering. And that is what we have been investing into going into the season. After our first underfloor design is done, we want to directly manufacture 2 of them. Just do it normally before Bahrain, because we are going to make a secondary design, yes, but this design is not going to be ready in time for Bahrain, nor is it going to be ready for the race in Jeddah, really. As you can see, it's going to basically be ready for Melbourne, so we'll just stick 1 engineer on this, and this will be done when it's done. We gain almost an extra 0.20 here, compared to that initial design. So again, we're doing this because the main gain that we're getting through CFD time is actually through this second design. So very important that we do that. Doesn't really matter if we put an extra engineer on the chassis or any of the other projects because we're going to have to wait 5 days for them to be done. And once those projects are done, we're going to go ahead and get started on the rear wing and the front wing. Once the next 3 designs here are done, we're going to go ahead and manufacture them immediately. The chassis we're just going to manufacture normally, although rushing them is a possibility if we give us slots for rushing the others. But we're just going to make them normally here, and we're also going to go ahead and make the side pods normally. Rush these. That way we can get the suspensions made too before that first race. So that should be a-okay. Next up, because we now have available slots, we're going to go ahead and start a design on the front wing. And this one is also going to be very similar to our previous designs, where we focus solely on the airflow front. We minimize everything else, but a couple of ticks to the right here, just to make sure that the front wing doesn't actually leave us in a state where we have to make 1 million of them. 2 to 4 is way better than 1 to 2. let's just get that started. It's going to take 44 days to make this one, so if we want to, we can focus and get it done earlier. But honestly, for Melbourne here, high speed is more important, top speed is more important. So what we're actually going to do is just make it normally, and that way we'll have it ready by the time we get to Japan. And with the other one here, we're just going to make another rear wing where we focus on basically top speed and cornering. Now, we already have a very high DRS effectiveness. We don't actually need much more of it. And again, I'd rather under-qualify the car, personally. There's nothing wrong with doing this. I'm just going to say that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But I'd rather under-qualify the car a little bit, and DRS effectiveness does have a very huge factor in quali. So we're going to minimize it for this one. We can also, if we really want to, maximize high-speed cornering while we're at it. We're going to lose a little bit more in terms of the other stats. But it can be a very, very good source of getting some more high-speed cornering onto the car if you really, really need it. In our case, I don't think we're actually going to need to. So we're just going to focus medium speed, which is harder to come by. And this is going to, again, propel us a little bit further up on the medium speed charts. Now, the goal of this season, second season, isn't really to win. It's just to score some good points, have some good races, and get research done. And that's kind of also what these designs exemplify. We're going to put 4 engineers in this. That way we'll have it done in very good time before Melbourne. And basically, by the time we get to Australia, you could argue that we are going to have a new car. And honestly, we can actually do this. And that way we can still rush to rear wings. We can do it like this. That way we get an absolutely new car before Melbourne. Now, it might be very tempting to use this slot here, but honestly, we're going to save money at the moment, so we can make sure that we have enough research, enough money to keep research going once it opens up a little bit later on in the season. For now, though, the goal is going to be very simply to build the parts, and as I mentioned, once these parts are done, the side pods that is, we're basically going to start manufacturing the suspensions directly after. So that is the plan. Let's see how the car looks once we come to Sakhir, because that is basically our first hurdle. And honestly, from this point, we're just going to allow the parts to be made, and then we'll get back into design once research opens up in April. We're actually not going to make any other parts before we come to April. So here we are, we're ready to start the season. We have actually made some car parts. In particular, we've got the chassis done for both cars. That alone has pushed us a little bit further up the order. We're now 6th and 7th and 9th in cornering. And once we get the side pods on, this too is going to boost us up the order a little bit more. With that, we're now 5th, 7th, and 6th. The underfloor, again, this is one of the big ones, is going to push us up to 1st in both low and medium speed cornering. And once we get the suspension on, we should be seeing ourselves actually falling down to 3rd in low speed, but that's fine. It's not really a big problem. We're 7th in tire preservation. We are lacking top speed. But again, this isn't really an issue for us. Basically, we just need to score enough points this season that the board is going to be happy. And they just want 7th and above. That's easy. With that said, though, with this new car, let us jump into the first race. We're just going to see where we finish here. Car is estimated to be 7th. And unfortunately here, the race rewards aren't going to be anything massive. So we do need to be a little bit careful with money this year. But yeah, let's see how this first race goes. And then we'll jump into the research aspect of this video. So the first race of the season didn't go well, 8th and 11th, but it's basically where we need to be in terms of getting points for getting 7th. So I'm very happy with this. We're going to speed along now, get the last 2 designs done, and then we're probably going to focus, as I mentioned, just on the research. As we're getting ready for Australia, our car is pretty good, but we still have a couple of parts that we can put on it. The front wing, the rear wings, and also now the updated underfloor, which is going to make the car a little bit better across all categories, and it puts us firmly in 1st, which should allow us to score some of those early points, which is basically all you need to get 7th in the championship. Now, our driver's seat could be a problem simply because of the fact that they're only positive at this point. If they are, you might need to upgrade some facilities in order to keep things up, which is basically what we might be doing here. Do keep that in mind. But at this point, once you've gotten all your initial parts, what I usually do in a research season is I just leave these slots open. Now, you have also entered your second ATR period. As you see here, ATR period has begun, but that ATR period doesn't actually end until a couple of weeks after research opens. So you can actually hold that ATR period and put in 5 ATR periods worth of research this year, and that is exactly what we are going to be doing this year. So we're just going to speed things along here until we get to that research period, and get it started. Before research opens, you are going to get a regulation change. In this case, we've got a pretty interesting one. Interesting in the sense that it's either 50% for everything or 70% for everything. Usually you'll get something like 50% for everything and 70% for one part, or 55% for everything and 65% for one part. You get the idea. Basically, one part gets hit harder than the others. But you can get an extreme one like this one where everything gets hit by 70%. And that is probably the best thing you can do because the AI is bad at research. So if you get this, try and get it. But honestly, either with these, this guide is still going to kind of be done in the exact same way, so it's not really going to matter. But we'll see what the outcome is of this regulation vote. So we got voted down. We didn't get the 70% one. It did become the 50% one. But with that, the research period is now open, and this guide can actually begin doing what it was meant to do. So when the research period opens, we're going to start by doing a front wing research, which we're going to invest that first out of the 5 CFD periods in. Remember, we just saved the second CFD period until research opens, and then we can invest it into the front wing. Now, because every part is going to lose 50% of its performance, basically 50% of its expertise, we are already seeing some pretty insane gains there. 70, 20, 13, that's pretty huge for just one CFD project on the front wing. Now, this is important. Whenever you do research, just use one engineer. It doesn't actually help using more than one. The only time you should use more than one engineer for research is just when you want to try and cram in another research period at the end of December. Basically, if you need to shave a couple of days off to get 2 research projects done in December, fine. But other than that, you should just stick with one engineer, because even if I speed up this project and start another one right after, I'm still getting basically the same daily gain as if I'm doing one engineer. So it doesn't really matter. The only thing I do by putting more engineers on this is making it way more expensive for myself. So we're going to stick with one for the time being. Next up, we are going to focus on mainly doing chassis and side pods. Now, the reason why I'm going to be doing chassis and side pods in particular is due to the fact that we're not going to be spending CFD time on these 2 parts. And as such, we're going to try and do as many chassis and side pod projects as possible. And with that, we're going to be focusing on basically what we have been doing so far. Engine cooling and airflow middle for the side pod. And as you saw for the chassis, top speed and airflow middle again, cornering, so to speak. Now, this final slot you have to kind of make a decision with, because what I generally like to do is use, of the 5 CFD periods that we get, I like to put 2 into the front wing, 2 into the rear wing, and 1 in either the underfloor or the suspension. And the idea here is that if we do similarly to what we're doing with the chassis and the sideboard right now, is that this slot, the 4th slot, is going to be mainly used for researching the P's that we doesn't put CFD time into. And in our case, I think that's going to be the suspension. Like, tire preservation is neat and all, but honestly, we can get most of it back doing this, and I'd rather prefer to invest CFD time into getting cornering from the underfloor. So basically, that means we've already kind of planned what we're doing with our CFD periods here. You can split them among 5 parts, that's fine. But what I'm kind of doing here is putting the CFD periods, the 2 CFD periods in the front wing and the rear wing, is basically just a way to make it a little bit cheaper to do this research. Because front wing, rear wing, 1.8 million per project, it's cheaper for the other 2, or the 4 basically. Now, in terms of how many projects you should do, and I think this is important to talk about, this guide is going to focus on maximizing your research gains to the point where you're going to be a rocket ship in your 3rd season. Now, if you want to avoid this, there is an easy way to do that. The AI use about 20 million usually a year on research. If we take that 20 million, split it on 6, we get around 3 million or so. What that tells us is that, including the front and the rear wings, the AI basically does 2 research projects for each part. So if you want to do a research level similar to the AI, do 2 researches per part. And if you do use CFD time, you are going to get ahead of the AI. But again, that's the way you can research at the similar level to them. Just make sure that you do 2 projects over the course of the research period for each part, nothing more. What we're going to do, we're probably going to end up doing 5 for every, except for the front and rear wing, but 5 for everything else. So as you can imagine, this is going to have a huge effect on our gains compared to the AI. We're doing a lot more work than they are. So that is the goal. Now that we've set these initial research projects up, we're going to speed along another month until the chassis, sideboard, and suspension is done. After our first round of research is done with the chassis, the side pods, and the suspension, what we actually want to do here is straight up just start more of it. We're just going to do that exact same thing again. Suspension focus is going to be the same, where we focus on tire preservation, top speed, like so. One engineer. Same here for the side pods. We focus cooling and airflow middle. Get that started. Second project. And we do the same here for the chassis. Now, once the front wing research here is done in 9 days, we're actually just going to split this into the rear wing research. So basically, we're going to be spending this slot mainly for doing front wing, rear wing until the CFD period no longer overlaps. But right now, in 9 days, we're going to start a rear wing research, and I'm just keeping these on the same day just to make the logistics a little bit easier for myself. That's honestly it. For now, though, we're going to speed along 9 more days, and we'll get that next research started. 9 days later, and that front wing research is done. And if we take a quick look here, again, it's giving us 15% airflow front. That's a huge gain back. We're also gaining a decent amount of low speed, but we'll take a look at all of this research later on. But already here, you can see that this is already paying off pretty well. Now, for the rear wing, we're going to start our first research project. And here again, you're going to have to make a little bit of a choice. Do you want to focus DRS effectiveness or do you not? Honestly, focusing DRS effectiveness here is pretty good, particularly when we're doing research. And we also do want to focus on medium speed. We could also invest a little bit in high speed, but honestly, what we are going to invest in here is just going to be that medium speed cornering. We're going to get a little bit of top speed, and we're going to get a little bit of that DRS effectiveness back. So this is going to be a good research project. But as you can see, generally here, the biggest gain you're going to be getting is DRS. So you could take the second period that we want to invest into the rear wing and maybe give it to the underfloor suspension. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. But second CFD period for research, third in total, goes into the rear wing just like that. And in another 24 days, we're going to start another research cycle. And again, we're just going to do the same 3 projects here: chassis, sidepod, and suspension. Our second set of research is done for the suspension, the sidepod, and the chassis. And once again, we are just going to do that exact same research again. Remember, we are investing into these 3, sidepod, chassis, and suspension, mainly just so we don't need to spend CFD time on them. That's kind of the entire point. Now, we do have another CFD period, but again, just to keep the research a little bit more uniform, to make it a little bit easier to keep up, we're just going to use this slot here and keep these 3 slots synchronized. It just makes the research a lot easier, I dare say. Once again, we're just using the very same sliders that we used on the initial one, because these are the stats that we kind of want to focus on. It is what the parts are strong at. But of course, if you want to focus something else, that is up to you. Basically, for this one, we're just trying to get as many research projects done as possible before we get to the end of the year. That's kind of the whole point. Now, in 18 days, we are going to jump onto probably the next front wing project. So let's skip ahead until we get this rear wing done. Our rear wing research project has finished. And as you see here, with the CFD time, even things like we don't focus on, like the airflow sensitivity, gets a nice little buff. Now, as I said, I do want to put a secondary CFD period into the front wing, and that is exactly what we're going to do here. We're going to put this CFD period in there, and it shouldn't be a huge issue. To be fair, we'll still get some pretty decent gains, probably similar to that first research project, because we are losing most of our gains. But as you can see, it's not 70, it's not 20 across the board. It is a little bit lower. So while the benefits of doing multiple research projects or multiple CFD projects are kind of diminishing, in this case, for the front wing, with the low speed cornering, I do think it's kind of worth it. And again, we can use the first couple of CFD periods next year, basically for the third season, to design parts that are kind of fallen behind. But personally, I just prefer to focus front wing. And there we go, that is sorted. And now we have another 2 weeks before we basically start another batch of chassis, sidepod, and suspension. Next set of research is done. Sidepod, chassis, suspension, all of it has been sorted, as well as our sponsorships by the look of it. But again, the only thing that we're going to do now is just restart all of these research projects with the same sliders. And again, I'll go a little bit more in depth on why I'm doing it like this later on. But basically, we'll I'll just quickly go over it because you might question, why am I only focusing these three things? Why am I not doing anything with the underfloor? And the reason for that is very, very simple. The way the CFD and wind tunnel time work is that every unit of wind tunnel time equals a day. So basically here we have 60 days worth of research in the hours, and we have 80 days worth of research in the wind tunnel, which means that every CFD project that we do with full CFD and wind tunnel is equal to 140 days worth of research. Basically, CFD, a project that you run with CFD, full CFD for us, would be 140 days plus however long the project is. So if we run it on the underfloor, it would be 177 days worth of expertise gain, basically half a year. And since we are running the project on these parts consistently, basically by running one CFD on the underfloor, that's going to be enough that the underfloor almost catches up. And by using our first CFD period next year on the underfloor as well, it is going to surpass the other components. So the underfloor isn't actually going to end up falling behind at all. And that is why we're using, just focusing the chassis, the sidepod, and the suspension. It is so that we can avoid using CFD time on them. Literally, that is what we're doing at the moment. We'll take a look at exactly how the research has affected each part at the end of this year, going a little bit deeper into it. But I just wanted to explain this just so you can understand why I'm doing things the way that I'm doing it in terms of CFD time. But we have another 27 days ahead of us before we get that new front wing. Our front wing research has completed here, but I think what we're going to do actually is wait with starting that research project. And the reason for that is simple. It might be 5 days until the next one gets started here, but it's a week until we get the next ATR period. Now, waiting a week is probably not going to be good for us in terms of just getting projects done. So what we're actually going to do here is just start a regular underfloor project, and we're just going to focus every type of cornering. Now, we're doing this because time is, again, not on our side. Wasting a week of not doing a research project is a week where we're not getting expertise. So basically, we're just doing this as kind of a step over, which means that we're going to do 2 underfloor projects as a whole, because we're still going to do more chassis, sidepod, and suspension research. Our next set of research has finished here. Chassis, sidepod, suspension. You kind of probably catch the drift by now. And just like we have earlier, we're going to start another project. And once this project's done, we're basically done 5 of these 3. And we're going to have to probably make a little bit of a decision. We do with the rear wing. If we're going to put another safety period into it, we can, of course. But for now, I think we are going to do 1 underfloor. And then we'll take a little bit of a look at where everything is at when we get to that final CFD period. It's just going to basically be better because then we kind of can see where everything's at. We can do a little bit of comparison if we need to. But so far, I'm pretty confident things are going well. We've gained up to about 50% here for the engine cooling and the airflow middle. And after this project will be above 50%. And if you remember the CFD parts, they hit about 60% or so. So this is actually looking very good that we will catch up to them somewhat. Not fully, mind you. But we'll get close. And as I mentioned, we can use CFD periods put aside next season to catch up with the expertise that we're lacking. So it's not really all bad. It's going to still be a decent enough thing. So with that said, we are just going to kind of speed along here. It's going to be another month, 26 days until we start that next CFD project. So let's see how that actually treats us. That underfloor project has finished, and with that, we're just going to start another one with full CFD time. This is basically going to be, as I mentioned, the only other underfloor research project we're going to do. As this one will basically catch up all the deficiencies that we're getting with the CFD time. That's at least going to be the goal. And we're just going to focus cornering like we always done. And that should be it really for our underfloor gains. So we're gaining a decent chunk across the board, which should be enough. And hopefully we can make it work for us. Next set of research is done for the chassis, the sidepod, and the suspension. And as you can imagine, we're just going to start more of it. And we can do it slightly off order this time because I clicked the sidepods first. But basically, again, just do the same sliders. Focus on what you want to. If you want to get something else out of this, that's perfectly fine. Focus that for your research. And for our suspension here, we're just going to do straight up this, like so. There we are. Now, there is another thing that we need to kind of keep in mind at this point. We're in October. we have November and December left, which means that basically at this point, if you have engineers, you can start trying to manage the days a little bit better. And as you can see, if we were to put engineers on this, we can basically get ourselves to the point where we might be able to sneak in another research. Now, the reality of the situation is that not really going to happen. We don't have enough engineers for that. And if we wanted to try and make that happen, we would have started a lot earlier. So keep that in mind if you're doing this yourself. You can use engineers to kind of optimize when your projects end going close to December to get a little bit of an extra research project in there. Now, I'm not going to do that for this video because I'm kind of focusing on just going through how I would do the research itself. You can min-max if you feel like it, but it really isn't necessary. That's also one of the reasons I'm not doing it, so keep that in mind. But we're going to skip ahead now another month until that underflow is done, and then we'll decide what we do with the final CFD period. So the underflow has been completed, and this is the CFD version 1, I believe. So with that, we've kind of caught up with everything, and now we have to make a decision. Do we invest CFD time into the Raving, or do we say do another underflow? It could be good. We're going to just take a look at the numbers and compare so we can get a little bit of a better idea what the difference would be. In this case, we gain about 40 high speed, 15 in the other two. And if we take a look at the Raving for comparison, which is what we'll do just now, I do think the Raving does come out ahead, mainly because, again, as I'm saying, start of next season, we can just put the first CFD period into the underfloor to get that one caught up, and that should be a-okay. I think in this case, we would do probably something like this, where we focus a little bit on that DRS effectiveness that we are losing. We'd gain 25, we'd gain less cornering. I'll be honest, it is less cornering, but it would ensure that we probably will not need to focus on the rear wing next season at all. And we can just make one front wing, one rear wing design, and then catch up with everything else. And that honestly would be more than good enough for me. So I think we are going to put that second period into the rear wing. And that should be it caught up. In a week, we're going to get another, chassis, sidepod, and suspension period. And we'll take a look exactly at how the research has caught up by the end. But that is probably going to be the final set of research that we will do most likely. Because as you can see, we're already about to trip into November. So one more research project. That's basically it. If I had micromanaged the research periods, or rather research project length with the engineers, we probably could have done a little bit more, but even that is perfectly fine for me. Again, don't really need to micromanage to beat the AI, and that's kind of what we're banking on. We're getting ready for our final set here of research for sidepod, chassis, and suspension. So let's get that started. Now, the thing you can actually do here, if you do want to maximize your research a little bit more and you still have very few engineers, is that for this final research project, you can choose one of these items. Sorry, that's wrong. You can choose one of these parts, and what we can do here is, in this case, we're going to use the suspension as an example. What we can do is actually put the extra engineers on this, and in theory, we could maybe save the project enough that we can get it done in time. Now, the reality of the situation is that it's not going to happen because we need 28 days for this project. It's done on the 4th. So we're just going to allow it to run as it is. We're going to lose about 2 months worth of research because 20 days times 3 project plus whatever we lose from the rear wing. Now, potentially, we might be able to scrape together one project with every engineer that we're getting back in 33 days. We could potentially also try and do something with 2 projects. That way we get 4 engineers on the 6th of December, and with 4 engineers we might be able to again scrape together something. But again, I don't think we can do that. We're just going to have this as our final set of research, just to show you that even a little bit of inefficiency is not going to be the end of the world when it comes to getting research done in your second year. Now, again, I've shown every single research project here, and it's kind of just to show you exactly what has been going on. So I'll try and make some annotations in the video for when the research begins, the end result of research, and then every project. Well, not every individual project, but basically the project period. For now, though, we have all our research projects finished. Let's allow them to run their course, and we'll take a look now at the end of the season what these research projects have actually done for next year's car. So we're at the end of the season here, and well, the season didn't go too well. What we're interested in is actually our research. So first, let's just go over how many research projects we actually did. We did 7 projects for each of the 3 parts that we kind of focused on, and 2 projects for the other that we did invest CFD time into. Only one of the underflow projects was with CFD, you kind of get the idea. Now, as I said, the AI does generally 2 average, so 12 projects total. What we've done here is 6 projects for these, 21 for the others, so 27 projects. We've basically done over twice as much as what the AI usually does. And also the AI doesn't really fully invest CFD into research, so we even have a bigger advantage there. Now, to see exactly how the gains are looking and kind of how they're spread across the parts, we're just going to go into the next season here. We're going to get a summary, and we're going to see how the car stacks up against the rest of the grid. Basically, we're going to go for a full reveal, if you will. Let's see here. Accept new target, and we are just going to speed along until we get to technical. So chassis here, as you can see, we basically almost beat the regulation changes just by focusing on them, particularly for the airflow middle, drag reduction. We did lose a little bit, but that's what's going to happen anyways when you do research. And if we check the side pods, similar tail here, we lost about 7%, but we did get most of it back. And for the suspension, again, a very similar tail. And even for the others here, we've got about 50% of our losses back. So not a bad result at all. For the underfloor, which we did invest CFD time into, for the cornering, we got about 50% of it back. So honestly, we should probably invest a little bit more into the underfloor here. But as I mentioned, if we invest that first CFD period into it, it's going to cancel this out pretty well. So it's not going to be a huge deal. As basically, we're going to be fixing this before we go into the first race. For the rear wing here, the gains are basically almost made up here from the losses. Very similar to what we see on the piece that we invested 7 periods into. And similarly here on the front wing, we're seeing something very, very similar to that again. Not as good as the other parts, but again, the front wing and the rear wing we've already invested a lot into, so we invested a lot into keeping that. But that is honestly a-okay. Now, how has this research actually put us compared to the rest of the cars around us? The reality of the situation is it's put us in a pretty commanding driver's seat. Like, dirty air tolerance is bad, but that's not a huge deal. Dirty air tolerance isn't really why we are researching anyways. Engine cooling is third, tire preservation is first. We're a little bit lacking in top speed. And if we compare ourselves to the team that won last year, which was actually the McLaren, you can see that we already have a huge advantage across the board. If we compare ourselves to the driver championship winner, they're the only ones that are faster than us. But again, we have a huge advantage across the board here again. And once this car is developed, it's going to be a rocket ship that the AI can't handle for 1 or 2 seasons, which is going to be kind of huge. But yeah, that is basically it for the research guide. There isn't really anything magical here. It's just priorities, really. That's really all it is. And I hope it has been helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them like usual. It might take me a couple of days to respond. I've been busy lately, but I do try and go through every question. Sometimes I do miss them, so feel free to hound me if I missed yours. But yeah, hopefully this video was helpful. It was requested after I made that renewed 1.7 video about Create a Team. So this Create a Team second season, focus on research. Hopefully it has been helpful for you. We didn't do very well in championship, but going forwards, we should be dominant until basically the end of time. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you haven't already, like and subscribe. Helps me out a ton. And I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.